there was a guy that was had had way too much to drink, and he stumbled down by the river, and there was a baptism service going on from one of the more evangelical spiritual traditions. And so he proceeded to walk down to the water and stood next to the preacher, and the pastor saw him there, and he said, "Are you ready to find Jesus?" And the drunk man said, "Well, I sure am." And so the minister takes hold of him, and he dunks him in the water and pulls him up, and he says, "Have you found Jesus?" And he said, "No." And so the pastor takes hold of him and dunks him under the water and holds him under a little longer this time, and pulls him up, and he says, "Have you found Jesus?" And he said, "No, Reverend, I didn't." And so the pastor's getting a little bit frustrated, and so he holds him down under the water for almost like 30 seconds. And he pulls him up and he says, "Now, my friend, have you found Jesus?" And he goes, "No, Pastor, I didn't. Are you sure this is where he fell in?" No. Laughter, the best medicine. So we begin today a series from one of Georgiana Tree West's, a longtime Unity teacher, one of her signature works called Prosperity's 10 Commandments. And you're familiar with the story, I assume, of the 10 Commandments, that Moses delivered the 10 Commandments to an unruly lot of Israelites that he had led out of slavery in Egypt. And the 10 Commandments offered the first laws for right action toward God and toward humanity, not unlike the laws, the rule of action that we're all claiming for our world today. The first laws, they were the first laws for a new consciousness. And when all is said and done, it could be easy to say, we don't need those anymore. I mean, I remember one of my teachers in Unity said, if you have to be told it's either not to steal and not to murder, you need to work on your consciousness. You know, you don't need a rule to tell you that. It's inherent in you to honor life and to honor things. But nevertheless, they were the first laws for a new consciousness. And when all is said and done, while we think we don't need those laws anymore, if we look at their spiritual meaning, if we interpret their spiritual meaning, they are really rules for living that develop states of consciousness. And each one of the commandments embodies a truth that exponentially is capable of limitless expansion, so that as we evolve, our understanding of that rule and law as stated can evolve, and we can extract more goodness from it. We can really use the 10 Commandments as rules of consciousness, ways of being and living and thinking that advance consciousness. And so studying that expanded meaning and how to use it today will improve the quality of our lives, far from being outdated. It'll be something that we can apply today, look at the new meaning, and then use it for evolving and advancing our consciousness. In this particular work, Mrs. West offers the 10 Commandments as states of consciousness you can use to create permanent prosperity. But you can apply the principles to any area of your life, whether you want healing for your life, you want to advance your consciousness of health and fitness, you want to advance your consciousness of love and harmony. You'll be able to, in the lessons over the next few weeks, to take each one as a state of consciousness that you want to expand in your own life and thus expand your life. So what I have for you today are the first and second commandments, and as I wrote this material, it's so content rich. It was hard to just extract. If you don't have the book, you want to get it because it's just filled with great content, and it's hard to extract just one or two things to talk about in a few minutes with you. And so I may extend the series. It just depends on how much content I have to work with. But the first commandment is going to give you the key to all you will ever need for building a fulfilling life. And the second commandment asks you to literally have a meltdown. Have a meltdown. Isn't that a funny thing? We're going to look at that in a few minutes. You have a meltdown so you can eliminate anything that's keeping you from building a fulfilling life. And so when we see these in a new way, we're going to see these two ideas: a key to all that we need to build a fulfilling life, and an invitation for a meltdown to get everything out of the way that isn't for our highest good. The first commandment is found in Exodus chapter 20. It's verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. And it starts right out with the foundational idea that we affirm here every week. There is only one presence, one power, one love active in my life, God the good. We could just stop right there. That's commandment number 1. And if you take hold of that, you really do have the key for all that you ever need for your eternal ongoing. That recognition of that oneness, the Father and I are one. It's the living intelligence that underlies everything in the formed universe. And all religions and an increasing number of scientists agree that there is one principle of consciousness that pervades the entire universe. And when we align with it, we're there. We're there. And the whole process of that first commandment is about cultivating an understanding of your oneness with God. And how do you do that? And the best way to do that is times of quiet reflection and prayer. And times of then going out and living your life fully aware of everything that's going on around you, present to what's going on around you, that it's Spirit presenting life and understanding and truth to you. This consciousness of oneness is omnipresent, meaning that it's everywhere present, therefore it's in you. You were created in it. You can never get outside of it. And so how we work with it is to consciously connect and cooperate with it through prayer, quiet reflection, right thinking, affirmative thinking. Likewise, this same mind that we can use to consciously connect with Spirit will create distress and sickness and lack and limitation, because it's through our mind that we connect with the presence. It's through our mind, as we consciously connect, that we draw those experiences into our lives. And so this first commandment is just so important in terms of recognizing one source, one presence, the source of all there is, all achievement, all goodness, rests in our understanding of this relationship and connection to the divine. Now, the best way, there are a couple of illustrations I have that talk about it. And one is when you look in nature. All of nature gives evidence to the presence and power of Spirit. And Mrs. West uses the example of an acorn. She says the acorn has all the potentialities of a mighty oak within it, but its outer shell shows no evidence of the mighty tree that's inside, right? And so we can think of ourselves as little acorns with mighty oaks, little saplings, and then trees, and then mighty oaks inside of us. She said the tree is there in potential, but its power remains static until the right conditions, till the moisture, the rain, the heat, the light, the soils, the nutrients from the soil are provided. And she says, we have the power of God within us, and it contains all the potential of all the good we could ever desire for our eternal ongoing. But it remains static until it's brought forth by conditions furnished by our faith. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. It's that connection, that conscious connection with the divine, that creates the experiences of our life. So the first step in manifesting supply, in creating anything in your life, is to establish a firm faith in the one presence, one power, one love, the source of God, the source of all that is. Now, there's a very subtle understanding that I came across recently in the use of my words that we say here often. And I've tried to think back to think, how do we say this? And it's this idea that God is the source of our supply. We say that here, don't we? God is the source of my supply. But that's not true. That's not true. It's your consciousness of God that's the source of your supply. See the difference? My consciousness of God, the amount of God, as Marty said in his meditation, that Emmett Fox talked about, that Meister Eckhart talked about, the amount of God that I hold in my consciousness is where my supply comes from. But my consciousness is my conscious connection. God is the source. God is the source. But my supply comes from my consciousness of God. So if I only connect with a little bit of God, I have a little bit of supply. If I open up to a large amount of God, if I only think of God, as Emmett Fox said in The Golden Key, if I don't think of the problem, I only think of God, then I will experience an enormous amount of God. I'll flow an enormous amount of God. See the subtle difference? It was really quite an awakening thing to me, that God is not the supply, God is the source. Our consciousness of God is the supply. And that's why we need to turn our attention to God only. Thou only, Lord, thou only. Also helps me to think of it this way, and Mrs. West gave this same illustration, the effects produced by electricity, whether it's light or heat or power, they all depend on the mechanism to which the electricity is connected or is attached. So if I plug it in and I'm a radio, I get music. If I plug it in and I'm a furnace, I get heat. If I plug it in and I'm a refrigerator, I keep cold food. You see? She says, the effects produced by electricity all depend on the mechanism to which electricity is attached. The experiences in our lives depend upon us being connected to the one presence and power. We plug into this divine source and draw from it the substance to be and become anything we desire. But it is a cooperative process. And in our minds that feels separate. So if you could just imagine yourself just immersed in the presence where there's no difference. I love the idea that God is the ocean and we are waves in the ocean, but there's no separation. There's no, I'm not the whole ocean, but I'm a wave, but I'm made of the same substance and essence of God. So the first step in manifesting and creating anything is to anchor in the realization of God as source. You shall have no other gods before me. The second commandment is, you shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above or that is on the earth beneath. You shall not bow down to any idol or worship any graven image. And that commandment is verses 4 through 6. It's a little longer than that, but I'm just summarizing to kind of keep us moving forward. Well, you'll remember in the story when Moses went up to Mount Sinai to pray, and where he received the 10 Commandments from God, he was gone a long time. And the Israelites, who represent our developing thoughts, and they're trying to build their faith, they're coming out of Egypt, out of lower consciousness, and now they're wandering in the desert. They get afraid. Moses is gone so long, they're thinking, where is he? Where's our leader? And who's going to tell us what to do? And so they start partying, and they get bored, and they fall back into a kind of a lower consciousness, and they decide they need some kind of protection and some kind of help. So they take all their gold and all their jewelry, and they melt it down, and what do? They make a golden calf, right, that they can worship, that they can see that as a deity that will somehow protect them and save them, keep them safe. So they make this golden calf. And the second commandment, while he's up on the mountain getting the 10 Commandments, deals with idol worship, deals with having only one presence, one power, one God in our life, and not to function in idol worship. Now, we've long outgrown idol worship, right? We've long outgrown the need for multiple gods and idol worship, except for maybe the TV show American Idol, right? That qualifies as okay idol worship, American Idol. But I don't think in our consciousness we've outgrown the worship of graven images. And here's what I mean by that. Mrs. West interprets the second commandment, you shall make no mental images of lack. No mental images of lack. Most of us still make graven images and bow down to false beliefs. Now, what do I mean by that? Every thought of poverty, every thought of fear, every thought of lack, limitation, worry, every fixation on not enough, every fixation on scared about your health, every one of those is a graven image, is a golden calf that you've constructed in your mind. You've poured the molten gold of thinking about it over and over and formed it into your own golden calf. Letting those same thoughts dominate, you are bowing down and serving them. Jesus it was who introduced the idea of thoughts are the connecting link. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. Like attracts like. What you think about, you bring about. And what you think about is molding and shaping the experiences of your life. When Jesus said like produces like, he said, are grapes gathered from thorns? No. Are figs gathered from thistles? No. So every sound tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. He's talking about our power for the little acorn to become the mighty oak, for the potential within us to be grown into the fullness of all that we are. He went on to say, the good man out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil or the negative man out of his negativity brings forth evil. So isn't it interesting to learn the ideas that you worship become the golden calves of your life? And this is where the remedy is to have a meltdown. We got to have a meltdown today. And what we're melting down are those golden calves of lack and limitation, those beliefs that we've constructed that are not serving us, that are not right, but they're formed and they're happening in our lives. So let me ask you, what's your golden calf? Don't have to answer out loud. What's your golden calf? Because is it fear, as we're relating this series to prosperity, Mrs. West's book, is it fear of not enough? Is it a belief that suffering and poverty are somehow noble? That growing up, did you hear that it's a sin to be rich? That it's arrogant or prideful to have money? Did you hear, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who suffer? Have you been told the rich got that way because they're dishonest? They're all crooks? Is that a golden calf in your mind? Did you hear from your parents? Money doesn't grow on trees. Did you hear, you're driving us into the poorhouse? Did you hear, we can't afford that. I'm a single mom. What did you hear that you took on in consciousness in relationship to thoughts about your prosperity? In my house, growing up, there was an observation that was made and a belief that was stated that when people get money, they change. When people get money, they change. Not necessarily for the better was the implication in that statement. When people get money, they change. Now today, my first response would be, well, of course they do. Because if you want to change your life, you have to change your consciousness. You're changing on the inside, and it's changing what's happening on the outside. And if you change your thoughts about your prosperity on the outside is going to change. So, but my parents summed it up, well, when people get money, they change. They change. I grew up the daughter of an immigrant factory worker father, stay-at-home mother, and we lived in a blue-collar neighborhood. And at about age 10, my very best friend moved across town. Her father's business was prospering, and they built a big, beautiful home on Fair Oaks Boulevard. You know, Arden Oaks. Big, beautiful home on the boulevard. And I watched her parents teach her prosperity. She was one of 6 children, and every week she got a $1 allowance. And she had this little piggy bank, and she was supposed to put the first 10 cents was tithed to the church for God. The second 10 cents was in her piggy bank for savings, and then she got to spend the 80 cents. That was for her. And they taught her those habits of prosperity, of tithing, of serving, of giving, and then taking care of your own needs. And her parents must have obviously followed that same process because the business was prospering and they built this big, new, beautiful custom home on the boulevard. And when that happened, I had a front row seat to the second commandment. Make no idols, no false idols, because they were moving uptown to a beautiful, beautiful new home, and the talk around my family dinner table was, when people get money, they change. Now, my parents loved our neighbors. They weren't, there was no disconnect there. They were sad that the neighbors had moved away, and the relationship changed. My parents thought of the neighbors now as uptown, somehow hoity-toity, that they didn't have a need for us anymore, and it was even difficult for my parents to drive over and visit 5 miles to the new house. I think my mother only went one time. I continued to take the bus, visit my little friend. I loved being in that big kind of mansion. It was a big mansion back then. It was like a big mansion house. I loved being in it, and I loved being with my friend. But the truth is, the neighbors did change. They didn't leave our friendship behind, but they made a change in consciousness. And that change in consciousness in the inner made a change in the outer. They're planning, they're saving, they're tithing, they're serving, they're working. Their prosperity habits built a consciousness that led them to a richer experience. The truth is, they couldn't stay in the same neighborhood because they weren't living in the same neighborhood of thought. Are you with me? They weren't worshiping. They were Italian immigrants. We were Belgian immigrants. They were Italian immigrants. And they weren't staying in that story. They weren't staying in that image. They weren't worshiping that heritage and all that is for them. They were moving up in consciousness, and then they moved to a new neighborhood. I said they very methodically and prayerfully melted down any golden calf of lesser life and grew themselves into a fuller, richer life. My parents never visited. And back at the dinner table, as I said, it was when people get money, they change. There wasn't any envy or any jealousy. It was more of a sadness. But what it was really was a complete disconnect, because my parents lived at this level of consciousness, and that family was now living at this level of consciousness, and there was a gap. My parents just couldn't comprehend living in that reality. There was nothing in their consciousness that could comprehend that reality. Their golden calf was forged at a certain level of consciousness, and there was no melting it down, and my friend's parents forged a new destiny for themselves. So, where's your golden calf? Today I want to invite you to recognize that out of the good treasure of your heart, all that you hold in mind and heart, you're creating in your life. And you're creating a beautiful life, a prosperous life. And your thoughts and your feelings connect you. They're the connecting link to the realm of spirit. It's the connecting link between you and the world that you form. And with that in mind, you want to feel God's presence all around you as the perfect fulfillment of all that you need. And then in that presence, you want to melt down any negativity. I like to say you want to have a controlled burn, right? Environmentally correct. You want to have a controlled burn in your consciousness to melt down anything that's not for your highest good, and then reforge with faith the attributes of spirit, love, life, health, wisdom, power, strength, vitality, purpose, release, order, whatever it is. Next week, I'll be sharing third and fourth commandments and show you how every spoken word launches some idea into form, and we'll look at the most powerful words that you can speak. And also in the fourth commandment, we'll find a place where you can cease from striving and gather strength to create an extraordinary life. Until then, this week is have no other gods before me. Charles Fillmore's affirmation, I am now in the presence of pure being, immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. I acknowledge thy power and presence, O blessed Spirit. In thy divine wisdom, now erase, melt down my limitations, and from your pure substance of love bring my world into manifestation according to thy perfect law. Thank you.